Stranger Things is a Netflix original series created by the Duffer Brothers that is quite possibly the most famous piece of media on the entire website. Recently, the first part of the 4th season for the show was released and was loved by fans, and this season is home to what I believe to be the best episode of the entire show, Dear Billy. So, I'm going to give my review and explain why this episode is so great, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to be making fun of the show just a little bit. So anyway, on to episode 4, Dear Billy. Episode 4 begins with a conversation between Jonathan, Mike, Will, and 3 agents. These agents arrived at the house because they want to protect the boys as they attempt to get 11 her powers back. At first, the boys were unsure as to whether the group can be trusted, and the discussion becomes an argument. Mike saying, "We aren't the ones in danger," a quote that he will soon regret later in the episode. Although this seems like a situation where these people are going to stab the boys in the back for their own good, they are actually trying to help. It takes a bit of persuasion, but they eventually realise that the only option is to trust them. And Mike is given a letter which, upon opening it, says, "Dear Mike, I have gone to become a superhero again, from Elle." A message that is a continuation from the argument that Mike and Elle had in the previous episode, when Elle said she is no longer a superhero. We then cut to Steve, Robin, Max, Nancy, and Dustin. Yes, there's a lot of characters in this season, but we're just gonna have to get used to that. And this scene is the beginning of the realization that Max is in trouble as she's just had a vision of a grandfather clock. Max then makes links between herself and the characters that have died in previous episodes, as before the characters' deaths, they had experienced headaches and hallucinations, 2 symptoms that Max has started to feel as well. And because of this, Max was under the impression that she was under Vecna's curse and was going to die very soon. One thing that I really like about this scene is that all of the characters present have been through enough that they don't excuse the idea and instead are very quick to believe Max.
It was like she was in a trance or something. Exactly what Eddie said happened to Chrissy.
That's not even the bad part.
They really are alone in this, because if they were to tell anybody else, then they would quickly write it off as them just being dramatic or lying. And now, they have to think of a way to help Max as previous characters died just 24 hours after their first vision, giving them less than a day to prevent her death. A noise is then heard down the corridor, which Steve goes to check out, just to realise that it's Lucas, who tells Dustin that Jason, Patrick and Andy are after him in search for Eddie. However, it's not worth the hassle, as they have very little time to save Max, which they then have to tell Lucas about. We then see the group reading old newspapers from the 50s about Victor Creel, which to their knowledge is the only person that has ever survived Vecna's curse. We then see Nancy and Robin burst into the room with a plan. After making fake names and contacting Penhurst Asylum, which is where Victor Creel was currently living, they believe they would be able to speak to Victor with hopes to find out how to survive Vecna's curse. We then cut to Joyce and Murray, who are trying to save Hopper, who is currently being held as a prisoner in Russia. We know it's Russia because his scene begins with Soviet music playing over speakers, and it looks like this. One of the prison guards, Enzo, has made a deal with Hopper, Joyce and Murray and has promised to get Hopper back to America. However, given that Hopper will still have to put in a lot of work to return home, Enzo says that there's only a 1 in 100 chance that the plan actually works.
I changed mine. Now I give you odds. 100 to 1.
Meanwhile, Jonathan sees a photo on the fridge of him and Nancy. Jonathan seems to really miss Nancy. Let's hope they reunite before the end of part 1. Oh, okay, no, never mind, they didn't. We then see Mike and Will, who, I'm not gonna lie, are the 2 characters I have the least interest in during this season. Mike is just completely oblivious to Eleven's feelings, and Will just sort of observes the situation, like just standing there, not saying much. Unless the 2 have some sort of comeback in the final 2 episodes, then I can see other people having the same opinion. Jonathan then walks in with the Coca-Cola sponsorship and discusses a plan to drive to Hawkins with help from their friend Argyle, who is played by Eduardo Franco, who portrays a character very similar to another character he played in the Netflix show American Vandal, my favourite Netflix show to date that I'm still salty they cancelled. Anyway, we then cut back to Max, who put some messages she was writing into envelopes. She then gives these envelopes out to the group and says that they're a failsafe in case the plan doesn't succeed and she ends up dying. Lucas tries to reassure her that everything will be okay, but she doesn't want to be too relaxed. They then get into Steve's car and drive to East Hawkins. At the same time, Robin and Nancy are pulling into Penhurst Hospital with the hope that they'll be allowed to speak to Victor Creel and get some answers from him. This is Dr. Hatch, the person that Robin and Nancy have to persuade into letting them see Victor, and at first is pretty much denying them of going any further, saying that they have to put in a request to see and talk to a patient, which could take weeks. But since they don't have the time to wait around, they have to find a workaround on the spot. But luckily, Robin is able to deliver an extremely convincing monologue to get themselves through.
So yes, we don't have the official paperwork, but don't tell me that crybaby Petey McHugh wouldn't have gotten an audience with Victor in a matter of moments if he'd asked politely, because you and I both know that he would.
GCSE drama at its finest. We're then back with Joyce and Murray, who have gone to meet Yuri, the person that they are paying to retrieve Hopper from the prison. They then give him the $40,000, and Yuri begins sniffing the money as if he's some Far Cry villain or something, and he insists on counting the $40,000 to ensure that they are trustworthy. And it is then that we cut to the beginning of one of the best scenes in the episode. Here we see Hopper, who is beginning his escape. All the planning, all the trust, and all the money has been leading up to this moment. Hopper is working alongside all the imprisoned Russians when he purposefully breaks the hammer. He does this as an excuse to walk towards a hut where all the spare tools are, where he encounters a guard who, after realizing the situation, enters the hut to grab a new tool for Hopper, only for Hopper to follow him inside and begin beating him up. Hopper's absence is then noticed by a guard who has been suspicious of him for quite a while, his curiousness leading him towards the hut. It was over. His change in expression as he realizes he's been caught. Enzo's odds of 1 to 100 had now become nil. All he can do now is accept defeat. And thanks to all the guards' terrible accuracy, Hopper is able to escape unwounded by the bullets. Then we cut to Max, who makes a stop at her house to give the letters she made to her family when she realizes her mum is in the back garden. She walks up to her and explains what the letters are for and that they are to be opened if she dies. Her mum, obviously upset by this, goes to hug her, and that's when Max has her next vision. The vision ends as she runs back to the car, noticeably upset. Then we go back to Nancy and Robin at Penhurst Hospital.
We found that music has a particularly calming effect on the broken mind. The right song, particularly one which holds some personal meaning, can prove a salient stimulus. But there are those who are beyond the cure.
Huh. Interesting. I wonder if that information will be useful later. Yeah, probably not.
Brantley. She meant to say Brantley.
Didn't I say Brantley? What did I say? Sorry, silly me. Words.
Hatch, after hearing this, had become suspicious. He knew something was up at this point, and you can see the moment the two realize their mistake. And although Hatch is skeptical, he allows the two to speak to Victor alone, clearly so he can go back upstairs to investigate and call the police. The two are then let inside to speak to Victor, and to get his attention, they tell him that they believe his story, to which he turns around, revealing a full face of scars, presumably caused by Vecna. We then go back to Mike and Will, who are packing, ready to leave. That's when the doorbell rings, and the agents that answer are greeted to a big surprise.
Hello there.
What the hell was that? Stay here!
This moment is exactly why I love all of the action scenes. This scene is filmed in a continuous shot and feels extremely realistic. There's a behind the scenes clip showing off how they made this scene, and all of the actors were involved in tweaking little parts of it to make it perfect, and the final outcome was great. At the very end of the scene, the agent that was helping the kids gets shot and is dragged into the back of Argyle's van as they attempt to make an escape. We then cut back to Yuri, who has finished counting the $40,000 and proceeds to go into the back to call Enzo. We also see Hopper, who has reached the hideout spot which he has been told to stay at until he is rescued. Then we see Enzo answer the call from Yuri, only to find out that Yuri had misled him and was instead planning on capturing him and Hopper in an attempt to earn more money for himself. And he had also given out coffee to Joyce and Murray, which was drugged, causing them both to pass out, and Enzo and Hopper are arrested. Yuri was the one person that needed to be trusted, but he lied. We then see Max in Steve's car again as she tells Steve to pull into a cemetery in order for her to read her letter to her brother Billy at his grave. And when she's clearly on her way to say goodbye to her dead brother, Lucas stops her and talks to her about the letters again. Is Lucas just completely oblivious? Everything he does just makes me hate him a tiny bit more. Oh, what's that? Girl who is clearly walking up to her dead brother's grave in order to grieve? Can I interrupt you for a second? We then go back to Nancy and Robin as Victor gives an explanation as to what happened to him and his family. In summary, Victor bought a house for his family after serving in the war, and after a month of staying at the house, dead animals began appearing around the garden, and his family began having visions similar to what Max has been experiencing. Soon Victor began having visions of his own linking to his past in the war. Then one day his wife was killed by Vecna, and in an attempt to save the children, Victor ended up appearing in another vision of himself, a flashback to the war when he accidentally ordered the bombing of a home in France where he thought German soldiers were hiding, instead killing an innocent family and their baby. And just as Victor believed he was going to be killed by what he thought was a demon, he heard a song playing, and after following the sound he appeared back in his home to find his children, including Alice, who died, and his son Henry, who fell into a coma and died a week later. Victor ended up in prison for this for a very long time and attempted to commit suicide by gouging his eyes out with razors, but it was unsuccessful and ended with him in Penhurst Hospital. After this huge explanation, Hatch appears in the room after calling the police and orders Robin and Nancy to leave. Then we watch Max read her letter to Billy saying that she feels guilty for letting him die. All this emotion that Max has kept to herself ever since his death is finally being let out, and as she finishes reading, she has another vision, this time of Billy, which Steve is quick to realise, calling over Dustin and Lucas to help. Billy then turns into Vecna, and as Max realises that this is likely going to be how she dies, she runs away. Steve then orders Dustin to attempt to contact Robin and Nancy. However, they are still being escorted out of the building and are unable to respond. But during this, Robin has a realization as she passes by the hospital patients. She recalls Hatch's words about how music has a calming effect on the mind, and believes that it is the reason that Victor was able to escape from Vecna. And after telling Nancy this, they make a run for the car to tell Dustin the information. And after running past the worst security guards of all time, they are successful, reaching the car and telling Dustin what to do. Then, back in Max's vision, a strange red mist appears and Max thinks, yeah, I'll walk towards this. The colour red is always associated with good things. Surely in an attempt to save my life, I should put myself in a situation that screams danger. I do joke, but this is like the only thing I have a problem with in the last 10 minutes. It like completely hypnotizes her for seemingly no reason. Then, after walking into what looks like that one Black Ops 3 Zombies Chronicles map, Dustin returns to the group with Max's cassette tapes and her Walkman, hoping that if they play her favourite song to her that she'll be able to survive. Max then finds herself in a place that hangs the bodies of the previously dead teens, and Vecna, who hangs her against a wall. The group then find her favourite song, and I was just thinking, wouldn't it be awkward if the tape was already at the end of the album and they had to rewind all the way back to the beginning? That would have caused a problem. Luckily that isn't the case, and they were able to find the song quickly. And just like how it happened in Victor's vision, the music creates an escape, and quite literally through the power of friendship, Max is able to escape from Vecna and run towards it. And that's how the episode ends. Despite the episode having no inclusion of Eleven and Eddie at all, it still managed to become the second highest rated episode of the show on IMDb. But to be fair, we all know what happened when they tried to make an episode all about Eleven. And although episode 7 ranks higher, I believe that Dear Billy is the best episode of the entire show. It still has its moments that I believe could have been worked on better, but overall I really enjoyed this episode and I'm excited to see what happens in the final 2. But until then, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all later. Okay, thanks for watching. Subscribe.